Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. If we are going to get out of this recession, we must have economic growth. That's understood in Scotland, it's understood in Britain, it's understood across the world. And how we achieve that is the debate that we're having just now. We've seen discredited methods at the moment of spend now and pay later. We're trying to find better ways to actually deliver the kind of public goods that people are looking for, and at the same time to bolster employment and training. And I would suggest that we start from the reality. Since no one on the front bench is left for Labour, let me read this point, and they can read it on the record later. Well, he doesn't count. You know, Scottish manufacturing staged a strong recovery last month, but it could not prevent a fall in the rate of growth of the private sector economy, according to the latest Bank of Scotland PMI survey published on the 12th of April. A weak performance from the service sector slightly reduced the PMI survey, but production levels at manufacturing plant rose at the fastest pace in 12-year history of the survey. Positive momentum came from existing customers placing new business, while the continuing poor weather acted as a brake on better performance. That's an indicator that in the economy which we have in Scotland, that progress is being made in hard times. It was also reported at the same time, on the same day, that the 2008-9, in the heart of the recession, there was an 8.3% increase in sales by the Scottish-based oil and gas supply chain industry around the world. There are many, many jobs of a highly skilled nature tied up in those businesses which are a success and are expanding. And we are finding plenty of examples around the economy that show that where business is expanding, it will then take on apprentices. Now, having the stopgap of having government schemes which support apprenticeships, such as Safeguard an Apprentice, Invest in an Apprentice, Adopt an Apprentice, many of these schemes have bolstered the economy and the firms which are struggling to come out of recession at this time. But the real recovery will come when private business expands itself and takes on the trainees themselves. David Whitton.
Grateful to Mr Gibson for giving way. I'm sure he will recognise, though, that these private firms can only expand if there's contracts to expand to. And the mere fact that the Scottish Futures Trust hasn't laid one single contract is probably the reason why these companies are still trying to find jobs for apprentices.
Rob Gibson.
Well, since you mentioned the Scottish Futures Trust, I think it would be important to scotch the rumour that it's doing nothing. There are school programmes being supported, there are hub partnerships being supported, there's tax incremental financing schemes, the Aberdeen NPD refinancing plan, the Borders Rail NPD, the 4th replacement crossing, getting advice, NHS Tayside, I go on. The point is that it is putting money into the development of schemes. I take a small example from my own area, the Tain Replacement Health Centre, which is £1.020 million towards a £7 million project. That was injected by the Scottish Futures Trust in order to kick-start that programme. There are many, many more like that, and if you ignore what is on paper and what is there to see, then you're not going to be able to have a debate about the reality of Scotland, merely the rhetoric of the past. Now, how are we going to get things moving? The whole question about an economy which is based on banks, which have been bolstering the prices of property and supporting share prices, is something that has to change. The lending from the banks has dried up and has become so much more expensive that it's been absolutely necessary for the Scottish Government to follow what's been suggested by others, including Gordon Brown, where he talked about a green energy bank, if there's any chance of him ever being returned to deliver it. But at least the Scottish Government now has been launching our own investment bank. By putting its money where its mouth is, the SNP government is showing its faith in the ability of Scottish businesses to contribute to the Scottish recovery and growth, and setting an example to the banks and financial institutions that they must do the same. And so the question about the banks that are based in Scotland that were categorised as part of the problem, the activities in Scotland were not the problem. the investment banking in London and New York, the spivs and speculators were the problem, and they were allowed to do so by the Labour oversight which failed in this country, and indeed, as the Minister said, in the USA, this failed too. Now, I would suggest that if we're looking at housing, and the previous speaker from Labour was going on about housing associations, she ignores the large increase in affordable housing through councils, which had been cut off in the Thatcher years and in Labour. And we're seeing that taking place now. I'm sorry, I don't have time. I'll talk to you later about it. But what was so funny about the Labour argument was the fact that they were appalled at the accelerated spend being used to buy land. You can't build on thin air. And much of their argument is about building on thin air. And I would suggest that in the end, their PPP schemes of buy now and pay later is landing Scotland and many of us with a huge burden which is going to have to be paid and will hold back the development of our economy in the future. Support the government's amendment. That's the common sense approach.